One of the things that we really focused on as part of our work is what is our ongoing learning? And I really integrate this with a lot of my consulting work as well, is just what's the work we need to do and then what's the learning we need to do. And we always had a learning plan and then we always had a get to work plan. And so there were specific things that we did to make sure leaders were trained. I can say at the board level, our board met quarterly. But there was a commitment that 2 times a year, so 2 of those quarterly meetings, there was 2 hours dedicated for DEI learning and doing a deep dive. And we changed up the topics in many different ways, but that was the time to really help bring our board along. For our leadership, we had something similar where there was a time where it was just leadership to process, what are the challenges, what are the things that are coming up for us as we continue to lead and move this work along. And so we had different topics, but we did make a commitment for ongoing learning. And honestly, I'll be honest and say, we first implemented learning on a regular basis with staff. And early in that process, our leadership was a part of it. But as we kind of continued on, getting our leadership together just as a group dropped off, and we felt that gap. We thought it was coming into play with who we hired or, new hire orientation. But we realized at one point when we were just doing learning within each of our sites led by our DEI leaders locally, and we were doing learning on our board, finding the time to get leaders together, given all the different changes, was still critical. And so we noticed that gap as we got along in the work as well. I should also mention that we have multiple sites in multiple cities, over 20, 23 now, different cities. And so we began to have leads around diversity in each of our different cities that were like a virtual team. And some of the strategies that I needed to use as I was working with some of our national leaders and working with some of our executive directors, I also shared with them as they were kind of leading work locally within their sites. And so it was that internal core, diversity and inclusion task force that really kind of did this type of work with leaders in partnership. And what did it look like? It really looked like, as an organization, we got to the point where we were able to put in writing our values around diversity, cultural competency, inclusion, and equity. And it actually became so pivotal early on in our work that we said, this is not a DEI statement. This is an identity statement. This is an extension of who we are as an organization, who we serve, why our mission even exists, and why there's a need for it. And so given that deeper identity statement that was put in writing, we also had within it some values and some beliefs that we had in terms of just, all youth we want them to reach their potential. And we want all of our young people to have equal access to education and various opportunities. And so what we would do with leaders is really just, number one, give them a couple of talking points around just why this work is important at Year Up. We also coach them through being vulnerable to share one recent learning that they've had, something that they've learned on their own journey when it comes to DEI. And the reason why that's been really critical is if leadership can't be vulnerable and say that they don't know everything, then what does that mean for the rest of the staff? It creates this pressure where staff feel like you have to know everything, and then we're not having the conversations that we need to have. And so part of those talking points were to, number one, express the rationale and the value of this work and that Year Up is committed to it, and hearing that from the highest level of leadership within a site and organization. And number two, to share vulnerability around one's personal learning journey. And then also to give people a challenge. What is the challenge for that particular learning session? What is the challenge for this particular year? Is it hoping that individuals be self-reflective of the lenses that they bring to this work? Is it to be open-minded, to see something different? And so based upon whatever we were trying to accomplish for either a learning session or for starting and kicking off a new strategic period around our DEI work, those were generally the 3 areas where we supported leaders with talking points. And I'll also say that our leaders received it well, because many of them was, I need support in leading this. I want to be a good ally. I want to lead this well. And so giving them some thoughts and some starter talking points and talking them through it really was very much well received by our leadership in terms of how they can show up and how they can be an ally in this work.